The skies over the English Channel had become a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams by the summer of 1943. Every morning, young men climbed into their cockpits knowing that statistics favored their demise before the week's end. Among these warriors, there existed a rare breed, the aces, pilots whose skill and instinct kept them alive when others fell like autumn leaves. This is the story of one such ace, Hauptmann Klaus Bergmann, a decorated Luftwaffe pilot whose single moment of human weakness would expose one of Nazi Germany's most closely guarded technological secrets and alter the trajectory of the war itself. If you're fascinated by untold stories from World War II and want to explore more incredible historical narratives, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring these forgotten chapters of history to light. Klaus Bergmann was 26 years old in the spring of 1943, though his eyes carried the weight of a man twice his age. Born in Munich to a family of craftsmen, he had joined the Luftwaffe in 1938, driven not by ideology, but by a childhood fascination with flight that had consumed him since watching a biplane perform aerobatics at a local festival when he was 8. By 1943, he had 53 confirmed victories painted on the tail of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, each mark representing not just an enemy aircraft destroyed, but a human life ended by his skill and determination. The airbase at Saint-Omer in occupied France had become Klaus's home for the past 18 months. The converted farmland hosted 3 squadrons of fighters tasked with defending against increasingly aggressive Allied bombing raids. The facilities were Spartan, concrete bunkers and hastily constructed hangars that offered little comfort against the damp cold that seeped through every wall. Klaus shared quarters with 3 other pilots in a converted barn, where they spent their evenings playing cards, writing letters home, and trying not to think about the friends who would never return from morning patrols. On a gray morning in late April, Klaus stood beside his aircraft as his ground crew chief, Feldwebel Otto Kreis, supervised the final pre-flight checks. Otto was 52, too old for combat, but invaluable for his decades of mechanical expertise. He had worked on aircraft since the Great War and possessed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems by sound alone. The relationship between pilot and crew chief in the Luftwaffe was sacred, built on absolute trust that could mean the difference between life and death at 20,000 feet. Otto wiped his oil-stained hands on a rag as he approached Klaus, his weathered face creased with concern. "Herr Hauptmann, I need to speak with you about the new equipment," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else was within earshot. "The installation was completed last night, but I have concerns about the calibration. The engineers from Berlin, they rushed through the procedures. They said it was urgent, that every aircraft must be equipped immediately." Klaus felt a familiar tension in his stomach. For weeks, rumors had circulated among the pilots about a revolutionary new system being installed in their fighters. The official briefings had been vague, speaking only of enhanced defensive capabilities. But Klaus had noticed the unusual attention from Luftwaffe High Command, the unexpected visits from technical officers, and the stern warnings about operational security that accompanied every mention of the mysterious equipment. "What exactly are we dealing with, Otto?" Klaus asked, keeping his voice low. The morning air was thick with fog that muffled sound, creating a bubble of privacy around them. Otto leaned closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "It's a tail-warning radar system, Herr Hauptmann. They call it Fuji 216. It alerts you when an enemy aircraft approaches from behind. The display shows a light and makes a sound, giving you precious seconds to react. The engineers say it's revolutionary, that it will save countless lives. But the calibration, Herr Hauptmann, if it's not perfect, it could give false readings. It could make you react when there's no threat, or worse, fail to warn you when there is one." Klaus absorbed this information, his mind already calculating the tactical implications. In aerial combat, situational awareness was everything. Pilots spent as much time checking their 6 o'clock position as they did engaging targets ahead. A reliable warning system could indeed be revolutionary, eliminating the vulnerability every fighter pilot feared most, the enemy you never saw coming. But a faulty system could be worse than having nothing at all, breeding false confidence or creating dangerous distractions at critical moments. "Can you fix the calibration?" Klaus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Otto's expression darkened. "Not without proper testing equipment and time, neither of which we have. The engineers took their equipment with them. They said more teams would follow up, but when? Next week? Next month? Meanwhile, you fly with equipment that may or may not work correctly." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "There's something else, Herr Hauptmann. The engineers made it very clear that this system is classified at the highest level. They said that if any aircraft equipped with this system is in danger of being captured, it must be destroyed completely. They emphasized this point repeatedly. Whatever this technology represents, Berlin considers it vital to protect." Klaus nodded slowly, understanding the implications. Germany's technological edge had been eroding steadily as the war progressed. Every advantage, every innovation that might tip the scales, had become precious beyond measure. The Allies were pouring resources into the conflict at a rate Germany could not match. Technology and training were all that stood between the Luftwaffe and eventual overwhelming defeat. The morning briefing took place in a converted dairy barn where maps covered walls that had once held farming implements. Major Heinrich Volker, the squadron commander, stood before 30 assembled pilots, his aristocratic features showing the strain of too many losses and too few replacements. At 41, Volker was ancient by fighter pilot standards, but his skill and leadership had earned him respect bordering on reverence. Gentlemen, today's mission is bomber escort, Volker began, his pointer tapping a route on the map. Our bombers will strike Allied shipping in the Channel. Intelligence reports heavy fighter presence, so expect significant opposition. You will maintain close formation with the bombers until they begin their attack run. Then you are free to engage enemy fighters at your discretion. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. I want to address the rumors about the new equipment some of you have been asking about. Yes, certain aircraft have been equipped with experimental systems. No, I cannot discuss the details. What I can tell you is that this technology is classified at the highest possible level. If your aircraft is damaged and you must bail out, you are to attempt to destroy your aircraft, if at all possible. This directive comes directly from Luftwaffe High Command and carries the weight of a direct order. Klaus exchanged glances with Lieutenant Peter Hartmann, his wingman and closest friend. Peter was 23, with angular features and an optimistic temperament that had somehow survived 2 years of combat. They had flown together for 16 months, developing the intuitive communication that kept both of them alive. Peter raised an eyebrow questioningly, but Klaus could only shrug. The official confirmation of the rumored technology's existence and its apparent importance raised more questions than it answered. After the briefing, as pilots filed out to their aircraft, Peter fell into step beside Klaus. This new system, he said quietly. Do you have it installed? Yes, Klaus replied. As of last night. You? Not yet. They said my aircraft would be next. Peter's voice carried a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What does it do? Why such secrecy? Klaus debated how much to share, then decided Peter deserved to know what he might soon be carrying. Tail warning radar. It alerts you to threats from behind. Otto says the installation in my aircraft might not be properly calibrated. Peter whistled softly. That could be a game changer. Imagine never being surprised again, always knowing when someone's on your tail. His enthusiasm faded as he considered the implications. But if it's not working right, that's worse than not having it at all. Will you abort the mission? The question hung in the air between them. Klaus had already asked himself the same thing. Aborting would be the safe choice, the rational choice, but it would also mean leaving his squadron short one experienced pilot on a day when every fighter would be needed. It would mean sending Peter and the others into danger while he remained safe on the ground. The mathematics of duty were harsh and unforgiving. No, Klaus said finally. I'll fly, but I'll be extra vigilant. Trust my instincts over the equipment. The mission began smoothly enough. 12 Bf-109s climbed through broken clouds to escort 8 Junkers Ju-88 bombers toward their targets in the Channel. Klaus flew in the lead element with Major Volker, while Peter led the second element off their right wing. The formation moved through the sky with practiced precision, each pilot maintaining position while constantly scanning for threats. Klaus's new FUG-216 system had remained silent during the climb and cruise, its small display dark and inactive. He found himself checking it compulsively, waiting for the alert that Otto had warned might come at the wrong moment, or not at all. The English coast appeared through gaps in the clouds, a gray-green line marking the boundary between occupied Europe and enemy territory. The radio crackled with the bomber leader's voice. Beginning attack run. Maintain cover. The Ju-88s nosed forward, descending toward the shipping lanes where intelligence had reported a convoy of Allied vessels. Klaus scanned the sky above and around them, his hand tense on the control stick. They came from above and ahead, diving out of the sun exactly as Klaus would have done. British Spitfires, at least 16 of them, tearing through the German formation with devastating speed. The radio exploded with warnings and target calls as the ordered formation dissolved into a swirling dogfight. Klaus broke hard right, following Major Volker as they turned to meet the attackers. The next 10 minutes became a blur of violent maneuvers and split-second decisions. Klaus fired at a Spitfire that flashed across his gun sight, saw his tracers miss, then had to brake hard as another enemy appeared on his left. His FUG-216 remained silent, its display dark, and Klaus found himself forgetting about it entirely as instinct and training took over. He rolled inverted and pulled through, bringing his nose onto a Spitfire that was pursuing one of the bombers. His cannon fire struck home, sending the British fighter spinning toward the Channel, trailing smoke and flame. 54 victories. Klaus had no time to celebrate. His peripheral vision caught movement, and he broke left without conscious thought. A line of tracers streaked through the space where his aircraft had been a half-second earlier. He reversed his turn, pulling the Bf-109 through maneuvers that grayed his vision and pressed him deep into his seat. The pursuing Spitfire stayed with him, its pilot skilled and determined. They spiraled downward, losing altitude at an alarming rate. Klaus tried every evasion tactic he knew, but the British pilot matched him move for move. The channel grew closer, its gray waters waiting to swallow machines and men alike. Klaus's FUG-216 suddenly illuminated, its warning tone screaming in his headset. He glanced at the display, saw it indicating a threat directly behind him, exactly where he already knew the Spitfire to be. The system was working, but too late to be useful, confirming what his eyes and instincts had already told him. Then Peter's voice cut through the radio static. "Klaus, break right, now!" Klaus obeyed without hesitation, hauling the stick over. Peter's Bf-109 flashed overhead, its guns blazing. The pursuing Spitfire broke off, trailing smoke, and Klaus pulled up hard to regain altitude. His heart hammered against his ribs as adrenaline flooded his system. "Thanks, Peter," Klaus gasped into his radio. "I owe you one." "Add it to my tab," Peter replied, his voice tight with the strain of high-G maneuvering. "Form up. We need to get back to the bombers." They climbed together, searching for the rest of the formation. The sky that had been full of aircraft moments before now seemed eerily empty. Klaus's fuel gauge warned him that extended combat had consumed more than planned. They needed to disengage soon or risk running dry over the channel. The bombers had completed their attack and were heading for home, covered by the remaining German fighters. Klaus counted aircraft and felt his stomach tighten. They had lost 3 fighters, and a 4th was trailing smoke, its pilot reporting damage, but insisting he could make it back to base. The cost of the day's mission would be tallied later, but Klaus knew the mathematics were unsustainable. The Luftwaffe was bleeding experienced pilots faster than they could be replaced. The return flight passed in tense silence, each pilot alone with their thoughts and the ever-present fear of fuel exhaustion. Klaus's FUG-216 had gone silent again after its single warning, its display dark and inert. He wondered if it had actually detected the Spitfire or simply malfunctioned at a coincidentally relevant moment. Without proper testing, he might never know. They crossed the French coast with fuel gauges hovering near empty. Klaus felt the familiar relief that came with surviving another mission, mixed with the guilt that always followed. 3 pilots who had attended that morning's briefing would not attend tomorrow's. 3 empty chairs in the mess hall. 3 letters to be written to families who would receive them weeks later, long after hope had faded. Otto was waiting when Klaus taxied to his revetment, his face showing the worry that ground crews learned to hide but never fully eliminated. He supervised the post-flight inspection with his usual meticulous care, noting minor damage from shell fragments and the concerning behavior of the FUG-216 system. "It activated once," Klaus reported as he stood beside the aircraft, his flight suit soaked with sweat despite the cold air. "During the fight, when I already knew there was someone behind me. The rest of the time, nothing. I don't know if it failed to detect other threats, or if there simply weren't any to detect." Otto's expression grew troubled. "This is what I feared, Herr Hauptmann. Without proper calibration and testing, we're putting you at risk. I need to report this to the technical staff. Get them to send someone who can properly adjust the system." "Do what you can," Klaus said, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy blanket. "But don't ground the aircraft. We need every fighter we have." The evening brought the usual routine of debriefing, dinner, and attempted relaxation. Klaus sat with Peter in their quarters, a bottle of schnapps between them. Neither man drank heavily. They had learned that alcohol and combat flying made a lethal combination, but a small amount helped quiet the mind enough to allow sleep. "The new system," Peter said, studying his glass. "Did it help today?" Klaus considered how to answer truthfully. "I don't know. It gave me one warning about a threat I already knew about, but the pilot who saved me was you, not some electronic device. Maybe it needs more time, more testing. Or maybe the technology isn't as revolutionary as they claim." "They're putting them in all the aircraft," Peter said. "I'm scheduled for installation tomorrow. Whatever it is, Berlin thinks it's important." 3 days later, Klaus flew his next mission, another bomber escort that turned into a running fight with American P-47 Thunderbolts. The FUG-216 behaved erratically, giving false warnings that made Klaus flinch and turn to face threats that didn't exist, while remaining silent when real dangers approached. His trust in the system eroded further with each malfunction, and he found himself flying as he always had, relying on visual scanning and intuition rather than the troublesome technology. Otto worked on the system between missions, consulting the limited documentation provided by the Berlin engineers and making adjustments based on educated guesses, But without proper testing equipment and clear specifications, his efforts produced limited improvement. The system remained unreliable, a source of distraction rather than advantage. On a cloudy morning in mid-May, Klaus received orders for a special mission. A reconnaissance aircraft had reported unusual Allied activity near the Belgian coast, and 2 fighters were tasked with investigating. Major Folker assigned Klaus and Peter to the flight, emphasizing the need for detailed observation and cautious approach. They took off into overcast skies, climbing through layers of gray clouds until breaking into brilliant sunshine above. Klaus's FUG-216 display flickered erratically as they flew, its behavior adding to his growing frustration with the system. He made a mental note to speak with Otto about having it removed entirely if reliability couldn't be improved. The target area appeared ahead, a section of coastline where Allied aircraft had been concentrating their attention. Klaus descended cautiously, Peter maintaining close formation on his wing. They emerged from clouds at 5,000 feet to find a scene of intense activity. Allied fighters, dozens of them, circled above what appeared to be a large naval formation. "This is bigger than expected," Peter's voice crackled over the radio. "We should report and return to base." Klaus agreed, already turning away from the concentration of enemy forces. But then his FUG-216 began screaming its warning tone, and simultaneously tracers streaked past his canopy. 4 Spitfires had been waiting in the clouds above, diving on the 2 German fighters with predatory speed. What followed was the most intense combat of Klaus's career. Outnumbered 2-1, he and Peter fought with desperate skill, throwing their aircraft through violent maneuvers that pushed both machines and pilots to their limits. Klaus scored 1 victory, sending a Spitfire down in flames, but took hits that punched through his wing and severed control cables. His aircraft began responding sluggishly, each input requiring extra force. Peter's voice cut through the chaos. "Klaus, your engine is smoking. You're leaving a trail." Klaus checked his instruments and felt his stomach drop. Oil pressure falling, temperature rising. His engine had been hit, and it was only a matter of time before it quit entirely. He looked down at the English Channel, cold and gray and unforgiving, then ahead toward the occupied French coast that seemed impossibly distant. "I'm heading for the coast," Klaus transmitted, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "Peter, break off. Get back to base." "Not a chance," Peter replied instantly. "I'm with you." They ran for home, Peter covering Klaus's damaged aircraft while the remaining Spitfires pursued. Klaus nursed his failing engine, adjusting mixture and throttle to extract every possible second of running time. His FUG-216 continued its intermittent warnings. But Klaus ignored the system entirely now, his attention focused on the desperate mathematics of distance, altitude, and time. The French coast appeared ahead, tantalizingly close. Klaus's engine temperature gauge was deep into the red, and ominous vibrations shook the airframe. He knew he wouldn't make it to base. The only question was whether he could reach land before the engine seized completely. He almost made it. The engine quit 5 miles from shore, its death marked by sudden silence broken only by the whistle of wind over his damaged aircraft. Klaus found himself flying an awkward glider, losing altitude at a rate that made reaching the coast impossible. Below him, the channel waited with its killing embrace. "I'm going in," Klaus transmitted, his voice calm with the acceptance that came when options narrowed to 1. "Peter, make sure you report what we saw. Those ships, that buildup, it's important." "Klaus, no, you can make it. You have to make it." Peter's voice carried raw emotion, breaking through the professional reserve all pilots maintained. "Tell Otto I'm sorry about his engine," Klaus said, then focused on the water rushing up to meet him. He had practiced ditching procedures, but never executed them in combat. Theory would now meet reality. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and filled his world with chaos. Water exploded over the canopy. Metal screamed as it crumpled. Klaus's head struck something hard despite his harness, and stars exploded across his vision. Then silence, except for the gurgling rush of water entering the cockpit. Training took over. Klaus released his harness, popped the canopy, and pulled himself from the sinking aircraft. The cold of the channel hit him like a physical blow, stealing breath and coherence. He inflated his life vest and kicked away from the aircraft, watching it sink beneath the gray waves. Only then did Klaus remember the FUG-216, the classified system that Berlin had been so insistent must not fall into enemy hands. He watched his aircraft disappear into the depths and felt a strange mixture of relief and concern. The system was gone, safe from capture. But Klaus himself was now adrift in enemy waters, and he carried in his head knowledge of the technology's existence and capabilities. A British rescue launch found him 40 minutes later, pulled him from water that would have killed him within hours. They wrapped him in blankets, gave him hot tea, and asked no questions during the short voyage to Dover. Klaus said nothing, his mind still processing the abrupt transition from Luftwaffe pilot to prisoner of war. The interrogation began the next day, after a night in a cell where Klaus had alternated between shivering from cold and burning with fever. The British intelligence officer was a captain named Williams, a soft-spoken man with thoughtful eyes who spoke excellent German. "The Hauptmann Bergman," Williams began, consulting a file. "You're quite well known to us. 55 confirmed victories, Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of the Luftwaffe's top aces. We've been expecting you might end up on this side of the Channel eventually." Klaus said nothing, providing only his name, rank, and service number as required by the Geneva Convention. Williams smiled slightly. "I'm not asking you to betray military secrets, Hauptmann. I'm simply trying to understand something unusual. When we recovered parts of your aircraft yesterday evening, we found some interesting equipment, very sophisticated electronics in the tail section. Our technical people are quite excited about it. They believe it might be some kind of warning system." Klaus felt his blood run cold. The Fogey 216 hadn't been destroyed after all. Parts of it had survived the crash and sinking, enough parts for British intelligence to recognize its significance. His one mistake, his failure to ensure the complete destruction of the classified system, had exposed one of Germany's most important technological secrets. "I have nothing to say," Klaus managed, his voice hoarse. "Of course not," Williams agreed pleasantly. "But you see, we're going to figure it out anyway. The physical evidence will tell our engineers everything they need to know. We'll understand how it works, what it does, and most importantly, how to counter it. Your silence, while admirable, is ultimately irrelevant." Over the following days, as Klaus recovered from exposure and his wounds were treated, he learned the full extent of his failure. British intelligence had indeed recovered significant portions of the Fuji 216 system. Their technical experts were analyzing the equipment, reverse engineering the technology, and preparing countermeasures. Within weeks, Allied forces would understand the capabilities and limitations of Germany's tail warning radar, allowing them to develop tactics to defeat it. Klaus's initial guilt evolved into a more complex understanding as he spent months and then years in prisoner of war camps. He learned from other captured pilots that the Fuji 216 had indeed proved revolutionary when working properly, saving dozens of lives. But he also learned that British development of countermeasures, based on the system recovered from his aircraft, had eventually nullified its advantages. The technological edge that might have lasted months had been reduced to weeks because of his crash. In the camp, Klaus found himself among other captured Luftwaffe pilots, including, in a strange twist of fate, Peter Hartmann, who had been shot down 3 months after Klaus. Their reunion was marked by complex emotions, relief at seeing each other alive, mixed with the shared understanding of defeat. "It wasn't your fault," Peter said one evening as they walked the camp's perimeter, a daily routine allowed by their captors. "The engine failed. You did everything right. What happened with that equipment? It was chance, bad luck." "I knew the importance of destroying it," Klaus replied, his voice heavy with continued guilt. "I should have done more, been more certain." "You were ditching in the Channel," Peter reminded him gently. "Your survival instinct took over. That's not failure, Klaus. That's being human." The war ended in May 1945, and Klaus Bergman returned to a Germany that barely resembled the country he had left. Munich lay in ruins, his family's workshop destroyed by bombing. He found his parents alive, but aged beyond their years by hardship and loss. The Luftwaffe was dissolved, its aircraft destroyed or claimed by the victors, its pilots dispersed into a population struggling to rebuild from catastrophic defeat. Klaus never flew combat again, but he found work as a flight instructor in the 1950s, teaching a new generation of German pilots for the reconstituted Air Force. He never spoke publicly about the Fuji 216 incident until approached by a historian in 1978, 3 years before his death. In that interview, conducted in the modest apartment where Klaus lived alone, he finally addressed the question that had haunted him for 35 years. Was I responsible for exposing that technology? Yes. Could I have done more to prevent it? Perhaps, though I honestly don't know what more was possible in those circumstances. Do I regret it? That's more complex. I regret that I failed to follow orders, that I let down the men who depended on our technological advantages. But I don't regret surviving. I don't regret coming home even if it took years. War asks impossible things of people, demands perfection in circumstances where perfection is unattainable. All we can do is our best, and then live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Klaus Bergman died in 1981, remembered by some as a decorated ace, by others as the pilot whose mistake changed the course of the air war. The truth, as with most complex questions, lay somewhere between these extremes. He was a skilled pilot who made one very human error at a critical moment, an error whose consequences rippled through the remainder of the conflict and beyond. The Fuji 216 tail warning radar system, the technology Klaus inadvertently exposed, became a footnote in the technical history of World War II. British countermeasures did indeed reduce its effectiveness, though never eliminated it entirely. Whether its earlier compromise significantly altered the war's outcome remains debated by historians. What is certain is that Klaus Bergmann's single combat mission over the Channel in May 1943 demonstrated a fundamental truth about technological warfare, that even the most sophisticated systems are ultimately dependent on the humans who operate them, with all their strengths, limitations, and fallibility. His story serves as a reminder that the pivotal moments in history often turn not on grand strategies or overwhelming force, but on individual decisions made under impossible pressure, by people doing their best in circumstances that offer no good options, only choices between various degrees of difficulty and consequence.